we're back.
Just like the Five Musketeers. Three Musketeers, isn't it?
It's four if you count D'Artagnan.
Well, nobody knows how many there were, really, do they, Pete? I mean, history's a sketchbook.
You do know that the Three Musketeers is a fiction, right? Written by Alexander Dumas.
A lot of people are saying that about the Bible these days.
What, that it was written by Alexander Dumas?
Don't be daft, Steve. It was written by Jesus. Anyway, five sounds much better. I think they missed the trick only having three, because if they'd have five, then two could have died, and they still have three left.
Are we there, yeah?
Let's do this!
It's not one thing, it's another. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back to the I just had a brain fart.
Podcast Part 3, the Part 3 podcast. I'm Will.
That's the one. He saw me in a moment of weakness, and he made a power grab. Yes, welcome back everyone to Podcast Part 3, the Part 3 podcast. He is Will, and I am Sam, and it's great to have you all back. We are now once again speaking to each other digitally, even though it was just too much fun spending time in person, unfortunately. So we had to...
Yeah, we just went on too many tangents, Sam. It was too good. It was just too good.
I felt we went on the usual number of tangents. So yes, this week was Will's pick, and he decided to do a little bit of a different type of third movie. This is our first foray into thematic trilogies, directorial trilogies. We're doing the third installment in Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg's Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy, The World's End. For those of you that don't know, a Three Flavors Cornetto, I think it's basically an ice cream drumstick, but in England they call everything the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, and in each one they eat one, or there's a wrapper in World's End. You see the wrapper. I think they eat one in
Not
Hot
gonna
Fuzz.
lie, it was it was tacked on there right at the end.
Yeah.
In this one, in an ending that also felt slightly tacked on, if you ask me. But yeah, this is I'm gonna let you steer for a lot of this, Will, because I really don't know how I feel about this movie. Because I love Shaun of the Dead and I love Hot Fuzz, and this movie, I want to like it, and I went into it like the first time ready to like it, and I went into it this time ready to like it, and I don't know, I don't dislike it, but I'm very like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling with this movie.
Yeah, it's a little thornier than the other two, and its emotional register is very different than the other two. I mean, I think Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, in my mind, I think you could powder those movies and you could snort them and experience pure joy. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think Shaun of the Dead is, I mean, if it's not the best horror comedy of all time, it's like top 5.
Absolutely.
Easily.
Yeah, I mean, and I put it up there with Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness as well. And Hot Fuzz is just so much fun from start to finish, especially if you love action movies. That movie is just pure joy.
Seeing those two movies for the first time is two of my absolute best like theater experiences of all time.
Yeah, I didn't catch Shaun of the Dead in theaters, so I saw that on video later. But Hot Fuzz was just such a blast from and start to finish, and it was kind of in a run of movies in 2007 that were just fun in the theater. So but this World's End has its emotional register is very different, and it's doing something very different than the other two, in that instead of sort of aping or commenting on specific genres, this is kind of its own thing. I mean, it's got like homages to other things, but those other two have Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz have the, action movies and zombie movies as their rails. This is kind of its own beast, which makes it a little unwieldy, I think. And I think part of it is that the metaphors, they don't exactly work totally together. And it's not like they're at odds. They don't mesh as well. And I think that's kind of partly by design, and that's why it makes the movie sort of thorny to sort of tackle. Because on the one hand, you have the obvious part is the looking at old towns becoming ubiquitous with chain restaurants and what they call in the movie starbucking, and then you have the other part of the movie, which is all about Simon Pegg's depression slash substance abuse problems, specifically alcoholism, which is obviously a big part of this movie. So and those two things don't metaphorically work together, as like they don't mesh. Like there's no connection between the two, and so it's except when you get to the end, which is Gary's trying to find help, and it feels like the only way to get him help is to end the world.
Yeah, it definitely feels like two different stories kind of competing for center stage. And I have to wonder if that's Edgar Wright was coming at it from one direction and Simon Pegg was coming at it from another, because it definitely they kind of keep bumping into each other. It's the alien body snatchers angle really comes out of nowhere at about the half-hour mark, in a way that in like Shaun of the Dead they do such a good job of just the zombie stuff's happening in the background.
Right.
And the characters are kind of oblivious to it to increasingly comedic effect. And I don't know, this movie, when it had its like dramatic / action turn, the first 30 minutes hadn't been funny enough to me to like kind of earn that. There's so much happening all at the same time. And like, it feels like it's the classic third movie in a trilogy that's a little too overstuffed with ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true on one level. I mean, I think the movie works a little better for me than it does for you.
You don't know me.
But I think the alien stuff, it's not doing the same thing that Shaun of the Dead is doing. And I think like the characters cotton on to the problem really fast. Like they get what's going on. What I think is interesting is that Gary refuses to like actually deal with the problem at hand and just keeps wanting to get drunk and keeps wanting a drink and keeps wanting to run away from his problems, keeps wanting to run away from the problems of the end of the world, of like his hometown, which is being subsumed, hometown / world, which is being subsumed by these creatures. And you know, maybe it does get a little over its skis at a certain point, because it's almost like the Pegg and Wright sort of fell in love with the character of Gary King. So the script has him be this outsider to the actual story, you know?
Yeah, and for all their love for the character, I never really get a sense of him beyond, like, he likes to party.
Well,
and he's, you know, to a point of being self-destructive, and he clearly, obviously, he tried to kill himself at some point, but it's like, I don't feel like you ever really get to know these characters as characters beyond they were friends, now they're not, they had a big falling out at one point. And at the same time, you don't really get to know the town very well. Like, if it's a town with a sinister secret, like, compare it to how much time you spend getting to know Sanford in Hot Fuzz. Like, this town feels... I get that it's supposed to feel a little, like, anonymous and distant and alienating, but you never get a sense of what it was to them before.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And I think in order to make the alien invasion plot work, I think you do need to get a stronger sense of place. And it doesn't... The movie doesn't quite get there for it.
And I think maybe that's them trying not to repeat a lot of the beats that you
from
have
Hot
in Hot
Fuzz.
Fuzz.
Yeah,
but it's like, because Hot Fuzz, you have literally like, you get to know 15 or 20 characters, and it's finding out who's in the conspiracy, who's not. Some of them are getting murdered. Some of them seem like antagonists, but they're not. Like,
right.
Hot Fuzz has so many good supporting characters, because you have Timothy Dalton, you've got Jim Broadbent, you've got fucking Olivia Colman's in that movie. You know, it's... that movie, like, there's no one in this that just, like, you meet a handful of characters. You meet Pierce Brosnan and the guy from Game of Thrones.
Right.
But you never, like, no one really pops the way they do. And at the same time, you also are kind of having to balance the 6 main characters, the 5 guys and Rosamund Pike. And I
Right.
feel like because there's so many of them and none of that, they're like, you could have maybe pared that down. I'm a big proponent of, like, tightening things up. Like, Shaun of the Dead has, like, a core group of about 5 characters, and really just the only 2 that are important is you know Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and
Right.
you have to follow them. And I think their relationship in this is a little bit lost in the noise of everything else going on in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, Sam. I don't. You're not wrong. I disagree. I think because so much of it is, I think, really is about just how toxic this, Gary King is. And I think Pegg is actually really good at playing him as this dude who looks like he just crawled out of a bottle.
Yeah. No, like, all the performances are great. Pegg's great in this movie.
Yeah. And
It's just there's I never, Gary King never pulled me in a good or bad way, the way Nicholas Angel did, or the way Sean did, or the way Scott Pilgrim does in Scott Pilgrim.
Right, and I mean, I think that's probably a better analog for him, because Scott Pilgrim is kind of a piece of shit too. He's not like a good guy, so to speak, and I think that Gary King is very much in that mode.
I feel like the film really wants you to like him, but he is like a piece of shit.
Yeah,
I don't know. I felt like I was spending, because I'm always rooting for an Edgar Wright movie to be enjoyable. I was spending a lot of time making narrative leaps for the movie in my head. Like, oh, this guy doesn't have any friends of his own because his life's a mess now, so of course he's got to go back to his old friends. But these old friends haven't seen him or talked to him in God knows how long. But, they're like, I don't know, he's toxic to them, but he also hasn't been in their lives very much up until now.
Right. Well, I mean, I can't remember how long they say that it's been since the accident, which is clearly post their senior year of high school.
But it is like, it's been 20 plus years since high school.
Right.
Like, I don't know if this is a story that would have played better if the characters if it was, a 10-year reunion.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I think it's clear, that the Pegg and Nick Frost relationship is the big thing there. And I mean, I think the part of the problem is you have Nick Frost being so standoffish. So he's very closed off up until they sort of have their big moment at the end. So you run into that problem where it's like, here's a character who doesn't want to talk about his problems, but you kind of need to know more about him in order to sort of go on the journey with them.
I think if they'd given Nick Frost some of the character traits of, like, Martin Freeman or Eddie Marson's character, so that he had a little bit of, like, warmth, or a little bit of, like, he's, like, uptight as opposed to just standoffish.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that would have helped him a bit.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's it's a tricky thing to thread, I think. And I think that if you're going into this one expecting the tone of Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead, you're just going to be disappointed, because it's just not, its emotional register is just a lot sadder and a lot more melancholy.
It tries for the Shaun of the Dead tone a lot, and it doesn't always suit these characters.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of, like, Shaun of the Dead type, like, sort of self-referential humor in the beginning, like the, you might make it to the end this time. They say we're going to the world's end. We're going to, it's like, there's so many of that joke is hit so many times in the first 30 minutes, and it just doesn't work, because you're also dealing with what is, like, clearly these characters that have experienced huge falling out and, like, real trauma. I like, on a certain level, it either needed to dial it back and be more like Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead, or needed to push it farther. I feel like it's stuck in the middle there somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of the problem with Wright's kind of overactive style anyway. I mean, I haven't seen The Last Night in Soho yet, or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah,
So
I
Last
haven't.
Night-
I did not. I was going to watch it, and I ran out of time. I also have not seen Baby Driver.
Yeah, I mean, I think Baby Driver has this problem too, where it's like a little too overactive for my tastes. I think at a certain point you're just kind of like bombarded with information, visual and oral, and there's like and music too. It's like it's all. I think it's all. Like I think his craft is really strong. It's a lot to take in either one or even two viewings. And I think that I think that's good on some level, but on another level, I think it can be hard, sometimes can be off-putting to get into the story, especially when it's something like this, which is more of an original story, as opposed to Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, which are, more, not a parody per se, but they are very much, it's an action movie and a zombie movie. And you kind of, and at least it gives your brain sort of a way to sort of sit back and go, I know what's happening, even as there's all this visual and auditory stimulation coming at you,
And I think that's the strength of those two movies is that they put a really good character story in the middle of like a very classic genre like movie. And this one, it's like it's trying to do the character story, but it doesn't. It's not committing fully to it being like, the Gary King story in Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right. And I mean, and I think the problem, I think that's it. And I think the problem is that almost the character story is too strong, and is kind of working against the genre stuff.
And it could honestly be like, originally Edgar Wright wanted to do this as like his original idea when he came up with this. He was 21, and it was just the bunch of buddies go on a pub crawl,
right? And
then he took that later in life. It's I mean we all have that like idea that's been kicking around in our heads for 10, 15 years, and it changes as we change as writers and people, and this might have been that for them. And it does feel like, and that's and that's no different than when you have a screenplay that's in development forever and just keeps getting stories pasted on top of it. You saw Battle Angel Alita, same as me, and you could see like a fine pastry, like just all the layers of screenplay in that movie.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, and part of that too, at least in Battle Angel's case, is that there's so much from a manga series which has been running for a while, and so much of, we gotta have Motorball, we gotta have this, we gotta have that, we gotta have this in it. So it also has that aspect of it too. But
it's like anytime you're adapting a source material, you get 10 ideas that you can't adapt. You probably are going to get 4 of them done right. And if you've been in development hell for 20 years, each script picks a different 4 out of those 10.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know why I'm picking on Battle Angel Alita. I actually enjoyed it, but I mean, that movie was in the oven for what, 15 years. It's
close to something like that. Yeah,
one of the many projects that James Cameron just left on a shelf when he committed fully to that Na'vi life.
Yes.
He think someday we'll get to Avatar 3, or are you gonna have to wait another 13 years after Avatar 2?
I mean, Avatar 2 is coming out this year, so I mean, there's that. But man, I am so excited for our tour of duty on Pandora, Sam. I mean, I know that's like 2.5 years away according to the release schedule.
Yeah, according to the release schedule. How many release dates has Avatar 2 had, Will?
I think about 5, maybe 6. I don't know.
It's not quite the gap of time between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace, but it's close.
It's close. I mean, 13 years, that's what, Phantom, it was 16, right, between Jedi and Phantom Menace?
Yeah. It's almost man, that's a lot of years.
It's a lot of years.
It's a long time for the highest grossing movie of all time,
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think that Avatar is so weird, and the discourse around Avatar is so weird, and I dearly, dearly love that movie.
I know.
I'm going to say it now.
You're allowed to love it. I haven't seen it in a decade. But much like this, I went into it not sure what to expect, and I came out of it not sure how to feel. You know, it's
it's just this one. World's End is just kind of thorny. I think it's hard to sort of like it's hard to parse, and the two metaphors I think are really just it's tricky, and I think it's smarter than the other two in some ways, and kind of dumber than the other two in some ways.
It's certainly more narratively ambitious, but that's the problem is because it's trying to serve the the body snatchers as a metaphor for the starbucking of your small town that you grew up in, and the story of like Gary King, like kind of like I don't even know what ultimately his lesson is, what his arc is in this, but either way you're missing some like key beats in there to get the audience fully informed in like the first half of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it absolutely seeing the town, getting to know the town, at least getting to know what has been starbucked. How the different pubs were different before they became the same, would help a lot.
We get that flashback monologue at the beginning. I honestly think maybe we should have gotten something a little more in depth. Spend a little more time with the characters as younger, in their younger form.
Right, and really get like how even at that age Gary King was toxic to this group of folks, like these kids. Like even at that age he was getting them into trouble, getting them humiliated in one way or another, and just a poison on their. Because it's like, I don't know,
the message at the end, it's like he thinks like they like ultimately we learn like he's depressed and he's suicidal because he's got nothing and he thinks all of them have everything. And then Nick Frost sort of counters like, our lives aren't perfect, we're not perfect, my marriage is falling apart, and like of course these aliens are there to sort of make humanity perfect, bring them up to perfection. And I think the problem is that it's not like, I wouldn't describe Gary King as imperfect. I describe him as like an unbelievably toxic human being. He's not Sean. He's not, like Nicholas Angel who's too uptight. He's a mess, and he like nearly got his friend killed. He's too extreme to like what's the takeaway I'm supposed to feel about him at the end of the movie?
Well, I mean, I think there's two things. I mean, I think he's, the whole movie is him trying to go backwards to a time when he was, quote unquote happy. And, he's trying to relive his greatest night of his life. And
sure, yeah.
I think the arc is that what he comes to terms with is you can't go back. You have to go forward. And the only way for him to go forward and to be a better version of himself is to literally end the world. I mean, because at the end, he's tooling around with the other blanks of his crew, the other robots of his crew, and he drinks water. He's not drinking alcohol. So something's been, he's been cured on some level,
I don't know, that's I mean, I get it. I get what the movie's with that part of it, but it really does feel like I don't know. They pay a steep price for not a great deal of reform on his part.
Right.
I mean, it's like all three of the Three Flavors Cornetto movies are about the lead character fighting against conformity on a certain level.
Yeah.
And what is the price of conformity, and what's the cost of fighting back against it? And like, I'd say Hot Fuzz might be the only one where everything is fully okay at the end. But the other two, it comes at a price. I don't know. This one just seemed like, I was never as there's a point in Shaun of the Dead and there's a point in Hot Fuzz where I'm just like, okay, I'm in. They can do just about anything, and I am on board. This doesn't have any... As much like the fight scenes in this are great. The fight in the bathroom, the bar fight, the action is really good. The performances are all great. But there's never a moment that reaches the level of, like, all of them beating the zombie with the pool cues to Don't Stop Me Now by Queen, where I'm like, oh, okay, this is... you've won me forever, movie.
Right. This is something truly special. Yeah. I agree. I don't know. It's just tough to come at it. It's just not as those also Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz are so well structured and are like meticulously structured, and it's almost like, I think, here you have the pub crawl to sort of as your guardrails. It's almost like there are too many pubs they go to.
It's a lot of pubs for a small town.
Yeah, I mean, what are there? There's 12 pubs, something like that, and like
again, and this is one of those things where maybe if I grew up in England, it might make more sense. But there's like I never got a sense of how big Newton Haven was.
Right. That,
you know, like it's bigger than Sanford in Hot Fuzz, but it's smaller than London in Shaun of the Dead. But it's like you know, we came from this really boring town, but it also seems to be like it's like a city, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. It's like you either need to focus up Gary King as a character so that we can really track him, or you need to way better establish Newton Haven before and Newton Haven in the present as well.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I think you can kind of solve both problems if you did that. If you, like you were saying earlier, if you had basically a big chunk of the movie, like maybe the first 30 minutes or so, were them as young kids, and you really saw how they worked as a group and their group dynamics, and then you kind of jumped to the future. It would make the movie a lot longer, obviously, but I think that might be necessary to
cut 3 pubs.
Yeah, there you go.
No, and to what you said, I think the problem is Edgar Wright's style in these movies is so frenetic, and so like the editing is so fast, and information comes at you so quickly that you don't really have time to breathe, and you're introducing way more characters in this than you did in the prior 2 movies.
Right, and again, I mean, I think it helps your brain. Going back to Avatar, I think one of the things about Avatar that James Cameron did that was smart is that he made an incredibly simple story that you basically knew what the end was from the jump, right? But the reason why he did that is because the movie is so like visually stimulating that I think had the narrative been more complicated and more complex, I think everyone would have just bounced off the movie, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean that's both of these are very curious examples of style trumping substance a little bit.
Yeah.
Avatar at its heart, its biggest flaw is that the story itself is, you know, rigidly by the numbers.
Well, right.
But you're dealing with like a visual experience that had never been seen before on film. So you kind of are okay with that. Sometimes you have to keep something really, you know, really classically structured to make the more inventive parts work.
Right, and I think that's what Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz do really well, because Shaun of the Dead also has, you know, aside from being a zombie movie, it's also a romantic comedy, and sort of the beats and the shape of that going in, and you know, with Hot Fuzz being a buddy cop movie, you sort of know the story of that and how that's going to work, and so your brain doesn't have to do as much work trying to parse the more inventive visual stuff, you know. So I think that's the problem here, and it's my problem with Baby Driver as well. It's just sort of like a bombardment of like noise almost.
Yeah, Edgar Wright does kind of live and die by his source material, and he's. I haven't seen Last Night in Soho, but like, I'm really interested to see where he goes as a director. Like, how will his work evolve the way like Quentin Tarantino's, or I'd say the closest director to him is Taika Waititi.
Yeah.
How would like
Oh, yeah,
Taika
yeah.
Waititi evolve? How he's evolved as a filmmaker without necessarily losing his signature style. And the movie
Yeah.
we haven't talked about is Edgar Wright was also attached to Ant-Man for like a decade. Throughout
Right,
all of
and
this.
he was about to start production on that, but then he did this because one of the producers, like a longtime producer of his and friend, was like dying of cancer, and so he came in to finish. He was like, "Well, we got to get this movie done before that happens." So then he left Ant-Man and then came back, and then Ant-Man never happened. But
yeah,
well, he never did Ant-Man. I mean, Ant-Man.
yeah,
happened.
he never did Ant-Man. Yeah, he's and you know what? Look, the MCU ain't for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I'm kind of glad. I'm glad he didn't get swallowed up by the MCU machine. I mean, I think there are certain directors like James Gunn who can kind of make it work for them, but I don't know if Edgar Wright could. I think part of it is that Ant-Man's was too enmeshed in kind of the larger MCU mishgas in a way that Guardians of the Galaxy didn't have to be.
Right, and they kept changing Ant-Man during those last couple years of development because it was in the works before the MCU even existed. He was attached to that like before Iron Man came out.
Right, it was going to be one of the first 5 movies, I think.
And then I think over time they kept like working in other stuff. And if you watch that movie, you can see like their attempts to tie it into the rest of the MCU are like very obviously tacked on. There's some that's another script where you can see all the seams.
And all the layers on top of layers on top of layers.
Yeah.
So I guess as a spiritual part 3, not a like continuity part 3, this actually kind of follows a lot of the trilogies that we've, the part 3s that we've been watching. It goes back, it does something where it goes back to the past, has to like, deal with past trauma, past problems.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly your third movie in a trilogy that gets too big and a little too unwieldy. But it's definitely like expanding on the ideas that they touch on in Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and it has all the same like visual gags and leitmotifs. It's all of these movies involve pubs and Simon Pegg jumping over fences and someone having a dead mother. Those are all things that that recur throughout all 3 of these movies.
I was trying to think of other like spiritual sequels like this, and I mean the only one that I was really kind of coming up with, even though it's kind of part of a continuity, so to speak, is Chasing Amy.
Yeah, Chasing Amy. That's definitely like Kevin Smith trying to tell a more personal, a more mature story. I'm sure we are going to talk about that at some point, and it's like that's a movie that's like it's ahead of its time on certain levels. I'm sure some parts of it have aged like a fine mayonnaise. It's like one of those stories where I was like, I'm glad someone told the story, but I don't think Kevin Smith was the guy to do it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, and it's certainly, I think it's certainly a movie of its time, and I don't think that movie in that way could be told now.
But yeah, there's a lot of thematic trilogies from directors, like Roman Polanski has his Apartments trilogy, which is like Repulsion, The Tenant, Rosemary's Baby. There's John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy.
That's right.
Which is The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. I looked up, I found an article that listed some others. There's Wim Wenders had his Road Movie trilogy, and Terry Gilliam has the Imagination trilogy.
Right. Yeah. Which is what? Time Bandits, Brazil, and Munchausen. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. And then like Kozlowski's Three Colors trilogy.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of the Chan-wook Park's Vengeance trilogy.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance. So yeah, there's a lot of the directors obviously deal with themes. This is and I don't know if they always intend like 3 of their movies to end up as a trilogy. This was obviously intentional. Right. When this one was coming out, they were like, this is the conclusion of this type of Edgar Wright, Simon Pegg, Nick Frost movie. And it kind of honorary title of Three Flavors Cornetto.
Yeah, it's weird. It's I don't know what else. I mean, it's hard. It's also a comedy. It's kind of hard to like talk about a comedy in a way, you know.
I mean, I think when it works, it's great. I think the cast is great. I think Rosamund Pike is great. I really liked her this time around. I felt like I felt like there wasn't enough of her the first time I watched it, but she does a really good job with kind of a small part, and like all of the supporting guys are great. Like Patty Considine's great, and Eddie Marsan is great. You know, it's like it's fun also like noticing like the cast members from Spaced when they pop up.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like the drug dealer is the like rave guy from Space.
That's right. Yeah.
Tyus.
Yeah.
It's it's fun. Like I like the tone of these movies. It's just this one for whatever reason, and maybe because it's more ambitious and because it's less of a feel good movie the way Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz are. But Shaun of the Dead has some like really heavy emotional stuff in it. But it's like I could watch Shaun of the Dead and definitely I could watch Hot Fuzz anytime. I think Shaun of the Dead's the best of the three, like by a pretty substantial margin in my opinion.
I think that's true. It's just Hot Fuzz is just so fun.
Hot Fuzz is just so much
so
fun.
It's just like, I mean, that's like a movie when I'm in a bad mood. That and Kung Fu Hustle are like two movies that are guaranteed to cheer me up.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things with this movie is that Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz are satires and homages to zombies and action that do zombies and action arguably better than most of the movies that they're referencing. Whereas this doesn't feel like it's quite as good of an alien invasion movie as a lot of similar types of films. When it's like again, the fight scenes are the best part.
They're great.
They had
great.
one of like the head of Jackie Chan's stunt team did the fight choreography for this. So like that, like the fight in the bathroom and the fight in the pub where he's just keeps trying to drink a beer are very Jackie Chan, which I thought were great. And it was a lot of fun, and it's just I don't feel like the rest of the movie rises to that energy level for me. For one reason or another, it's hard for me to put a finger on it.
No, I mean, I think that's totally fair, and I think you're not wrong. I think it's just I think that emotional register just sort of because it's a lot sadder. It's just you're dealing with guys who are just a lot sadder, whereas like Nicholas Angel, I mean, Sean's just sort of like a lovable kind of slacker guy, like all of us were in our 20s. Like, it's like he's easy to relate to, especially for guys like you and I. And Nicholas Angel is just is the perfect cop who just needs to let loose, and you can kind of like, you can get into his vibe. And like, these guys are just all like, they're just sad. Like, their lives are not like great. They're just, they're sad. Yeah, and it's like you compare like Gary King to like Ed from Nick Frost as Ed in Shaun of the Dead, and like Nick Frost and as Ed he's like kind of a guy that's holding Shaun back, right? And Shaun ends up still like defending him on a certain level, and in this, I don't know. I think maybe it's also because like Nick Frost playing this type of character comes off more lovable than Simon Pegg. Right. And, I think I miss those two characters, their dynamic in this. It's, it's still effective, but it is way less fun. And therefore I'm less invested in it because I'm finding I'm not finding a way to latch on to either character. Right. I mean, and it's kind of interesting that they did it this way, and it makes sense, but that they flipped the script, basically. You'd think that Nick Frost would be the Simon Pegg role, and Simon Pegg would be in the Nick Frost role, judging by the other two movies, Yeah, well, I just don't think, I don't think Nick Frost as Gary King would come off as toxic. He'd come off far too comical, right, and lovable, and you'd really root for him in a way. And I think the movie doesn't really want you to. And Simon Pegg in the Nick Frost part would just he'd be too similar to like Martin Freeman's character, I think. Yeah, like sort of the put upon, Dr. Watson type, Jim from The Office. Yeah, or Tim. Yeah. Sorry, he's Tim from The Office. Yeah.
I think we'll come back around to a couple movies like this, like certainly Chasing Amy, maybe In the Mouth of Madness if we want to talk about or like if we want to just do an episode talking about directorial trilogies.
Right.
If we want to do a little Kieslowski binge at some point, or a Lars von Trier's Depression trilogy.
Oh yeah, that'll be a great time.
Yeah. Hey, Will, we watched Melancholia. How do you feel?
Melancholy.
The Earth is evil. No one will miss it. Yeah, it's but it's not my favorite of the three. It's not the one I revisit very often, obviously, due to the fact that I've watched it twice, once in the theater and once yesterday. But it is an interesting movie, and you can't blame them you can't say it's a lack of ideas or a lack of effort. It's not everyone feeling tired. No, everyone's putting their all into this. I just think the movie itself is a little too unfocused, and too many things are kind of in conflict with each other. It's admirable but flawed.
Yep. I'd say that's the same for me. I think I like it a little bit more than you, but yeah, I think that's where I come down.
Well, I appreciate it. I just don't find myself revisiting it very often.
Yeah, and I've actually revisited it a lot since it came out. So I don't know what that tells you, but
also it occurs to me, Avatar and this, two messy movies about blue aliens.
Huh? Yeah, that's true. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, so for next week, speaking of movies I've revisited a lot, it's going to be Friday the 13th. And so when we recorded our 13th episode, I noticed that we humorously picked Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Warriors. So
not intentionally.
Not intentionally. No. It was just a happy coincidence slash boner on our part. But so for Friday the 13th, 2022, we are watching Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D.
All right. I've actually never seen it, so this will be
You've never seen it?
Fun. No, I don't think so.
It's definitely not the best one of those like early ones. This is from like the first 5 before Jason became like a full-on zombie. So like you've got 1 which obviously doesn't have Jason in it except at the very end. The mother's the killer. This is actually part of a little trilogy. This is 2, 3, and 4 take place chronologically, like literally like 2 leads into 3 leads into 4. And 4 is, that's the one with Crispin Glover and Corey Feldman. 2 is the one where he's got a sack on his head. 3 is the one in the middle where nothing looks quite as good because they shot it in 3D with one of those big 80s 3D cameras, but he gets his hockey mask. It's got some pretty good kills. I remember this one the first time I ever saw it. It really actually felt creepy to me, and part of that's because I worked at a summer camp.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah. No, this will be fun. It's gotta be 85 minutes if it's a day. It's I think it should be a nice little breeze for us.
All right. Well, I'm excited.
It's not going to challenge us in any way like The World's End.
Yeah, but there's a whole franchise of to talk about attached to it. So
absolutely, and I, as I've said before, I love the Friday the 13th movies, just like I love the Universal monsters. And as you said about Avatar, you love ambitious 3D genre work, and this is, I'd say, Friday the 13th Part 3 walks hand in hand with Avatar. In the realm of just like groundbreaking visuals.
Excellent. I am all on board, Sam.
They didn't film near a lake. They made their own lake, and it will show.
Awesome.
So yes, Friday the 13th on Friday the 13th. Good times on Podcast Part 3. You can follow us. We're on Instagram at Podcast Part 3 and on Twitter at Podcast Part 3. Like us, subscribe to us, follow us. Leave a review, leave a rating.
Yeah, any of that stuff. Hey, if you leave a rating, maybe we'll read it on the show. Leave a review, I mean. Yeah.
So a great rating here. 1 star. from. I read it. I read the rating.
Well, yeah,
was
if
from-
you leave a review, we'll read it.
It's a review from my mother. 1 star. Is this the best you can do? You're 36.
Figure out your recording equipment.
When are you gonna give me a grandchild? Yes, our mothers just constantly call in with audio engineering notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So until next time, Will, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, I think if you are watching Edgar Wright's movies, I think it's worth watching The World's End.
Yeah, he doesn't really have like a stinker in there that you can
No.
skip. All his movies are very much his movies and very like visually exciting, and the stories are always fun, the action's always good, the music's always
Music's
great.
always great.
Yeah, this is just one that's because I think it's ambitious and they were trying to build on existing stuff but also kind of mature the storytelling. It stumbles here and there, and it maybe makes for not quite the it doesn't make for like the pure experience of Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, and it's and that's that's fine. That's totally fine. I'm okay with that.
At least it's trying something new, I guess.
Yeah, and when it works really well. Like when this movie is like clicking on all fronts, it's a blast.
Yep.
Yeah, good times.
Oh my God. Good times.
All right, folks. Well, we'll see you all next week at Camp Crystal Lake in New Jersey. I think it's in New Jersey.
The floating location of Camp Crystal Lake.
It's a boat ride from New York. Yes. Well, until then, Will, always a pleasure, and
Always.
I will talk to you soon.
Adios.
Have a good night, folks.